there is a strange ache that lives quietly beneath the surface of modern life. You might feel it when you're scrolling endlessly, not quite searching for anything, or in the silence after a long day when you ask yourself if any of it really matters. The job, the errands, the plans, the performance. There is food in the fridge, electricity in the walls, and a roof overhead, and still something vital feels absent. What are we living for? That question, as old as human breath, doesn't go away just because life becomes more comfortable. In fact, comfort may be the very thing that muffles our instinct to ask it aloud. Many of us are taught to chase success, security, validation, but not meaning, not purpose. And when the applause dies down, when the finish line is crossed, we often find ourselves standing in a quiet fog, unsure of why we were running in the first place. Viktor Frankl knew this ache intimately, a psychiatrist, a survivor of 4 Nazi concentration camps, and the author of Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl developed his entire philosophy on the idea that human beings are not driven by pleasure or power alone, but by a deep, often unconscious will to meaning. In a world increasingly obsessed with what looks good on the outside, Frankl challenges us to turn inward, to ask, what makes a life worth living? What are you willing to suffer for, if necessary? What principle, what vision, what love would you die for, if it came to that? This is not a dark question, it's a clarifying one, because in finding what we would die for, we often discover what we must live for. And this is not just Frankl's story, it is a human story. This longing for meaning has echoed through caves and cathedrals, deserts and city streets, from the Stoics of ancient Rome to the mystics of the East, from battlefield letters to modern therapy rooms. The same truth rises again and again. A life without purpose is not just empty, it is dangerous. Today, we are going to walk with Viktor Frankl through his suffering, his insights, his deep belief that even in the worst of human circumstances we can choose to live with dignity and direction. This is not just a history lesson or a psychological theory. It is an invitation to stop drifting, to look deeper, to ask the question many are too afraid to speak aloud. What are you living for? To understand Viktor Frankl's message, we first need to step back, not just into his life, but into the larger question that shaped it, the human hunger for meaning. This is not a new crisis. It did not begin with smartphones or corporate burnout. It is ancient, persistent, and deeply human. Civilizations have risen and fallen on the back of this question. What is a life worth living? In ancient Greece, philosophers gathered in stone courtyards and asked what it meant to live eudaimonia, a life of flourishing, a life in harmony with one's true nature. Socrates, perhaps the original psychological rebel, insisted that the unexamined life was not worth living. Not a life of wealth, not a life of status, but a life without reflection, he said, is a kind of spiritual death. Thousands of miles away, in India, the sages of the Upanishads asked their own version of the same question. They spoke of dharma, not just duty, but cosmic alignment, the idea that each person has a unique calling, a thread of meaning woven into the fabric of the universe. To ignore it was to live in illusion. To follow it was to walk the path of liberation. And then there was the Buddha, a prince who left behind his palace not out of boredom, but because the luxury of life could not answer the ache of suffering. His journey was not to escape life, but to understand it, to see it clearly, and in that clarity, to uncover the middle path, a life not of indulgence or denial, but of conscious presence and purposeful compassion. The thread winds through time. In the deserts of the Middle East, prophets called people to live not for the self, but for something greater. In the halls of ancient China, Confucius taught that a meaningful life is one rooted in virtue, respect, and harmonious relationships. And in the cold northern climates of Europe, the Norse believed in weird, the mysterious weave of fate and action, where honor meant living with courage, even if the gods themselves offered no guarantees. But not all eras encouraged this search. The Industrial Revolution brought extraordinary advances, but also alienation. People who once farmed land they knew intimately were now working in factories, performing tasks with no visible connection to the end result. The poet William Blake called these the dark satanic mills for a reason. The machine age promised efficiency but often stripped life of texture, of sacredness, of meaning. Fast forward to the 20th century. The two world wars shattered the illusion of steady progress. The Holocaust, the atomic bomb, the mass displacements, these were not the actions of primitive people. They were the acts of so-called modernity, educated societies, civilized nations, and yet they produced death on an industrial scale. This is where Viktor Frankl's life intersects with history. He was not just a thinker in an ivory tower, he was a prisoner in Auschwitz, a man who lost his parents, his brother, his pregnant wife, a man who watched people die not only from gas and bullets, but from hopelessness, from the collapse of meaning. Frankl observed something haunting in the camps. Those who had a why could survive almost anyhow. Those who believed there was a purpose, however faint, however private, were more likely to endure the unthinkable. Whether it was the hope of reuniting with a loved one, finishing a manuscript, or simply refusing to let their soul be broken, purpose kept them alive. He called this logotherapy, from the Greek logos, meaning reason or meaning. While Freud said we are driven by pleasure and Adler by power, Frankl said, no, we are driven by meaning. And when that meaning collapses, so do we. In many ways, Frankl was carrying forward the deeper wisdom of earlier ages, updating it for a broken century. Like the Stoics, he taught that we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. Like the mystics, he believed suffering could be transformed, not erased. And like the ancient seekers, he insisted that purpose is not given to us. It is something we must discover, and sometimes even create. Today, we live in a time of paradox. We have more access to knowledge than any generation before us, and yet we are starved for wisdom. We are more connected and more alone. We are more free and more lost. We have 1,000 ways to numb ourselves: entertainment, consumerism, dopamine on demand. But numbing is not the same as healing, and comfort is not the same as purpose. Frankl's message is more urgent now than ever, because the modern world, for all its beauty, often hides the question we most need to ask. What are you living for? That question is not about grand gestures. It is not always about quitting your job, moving to a monastery, or saving the world. Sometimes it is smaller and deeper. Sometimes it is about choosing to show up, to be kind in a world that makes it easy not to be, to carry a thread of light through the dark, to take responsibility for your own soul when nobody else is watching. Across history, the answers to this question have taken many forms, but the question itself remains constant, and it is yours to ask now. Who are you when everything else is stripped away? What do you serve when no one is clapping? What do you love enough to suffer for, enough to live for, and, if it came to it, to die for? This is the beginning of meaning, not found in books or formulas, but in the quiet reckoning with your own soul. And it is here that Frankl's legacy becomes not just a theory, but a challenge, a mirror, an invitation. Because you can spend your life chasing applause, comfort, distraction, or you can live from the inside out. You can ask harder questions, and maybe you can begin to answer them, not with words, but with how you live. The search for meaning is not just a poetic ideal, it is a psychological necessity. When Viktor Frankl proposed that the will to meaning is the primary human drive, he was pushing against the most dominant schools of psychology of his time. Freud believed we are driven by the pursuit of pleasure. Adler argued we are driven by a desire for power or superiority. But Frankl, having stared into the abyss of human suffering, saw something deeper. He believed that we can endure unimaginable pain if we believe it matters, and we can crumble under comfort if we believe it doesn't. At the heart of his theory, logotherapy, is a simple idea. Meaning is not something we invent, like a fantasy. It is something we detect, uncover, or create through the way we respond to life. Modern psychology supports this in powerful ways. Take, for example, the work of Martin Seligman, one of the founders of positive psychology. In his study of well-being, Seligman outlined 5 pillars of a fulfilling life: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, often abbreviated as PERMA. Out of these, meaning stands apart. It is the glue that binds the others together. Without it, success feels hollow. Relationships feel shallow. Pleasure feels fleeting. Or consider the phenomenon of existential vacuum, a term Frankl coined to describe the inner emptiness that arises when a person lacks purpose. It shows up as boredom, apathy, depression, or restlessness. We see it today in high-functioning individuals who outwardly have it all, but inwardly feel lost. It's the entrepreneur who reaches their goals and feels nothing, the straight-A student who can't find a reason to get out of bed, the influencer who gets thousands of likes but feels spiritually invisible. Frankl believed that this vacuum was not a sign of illness, but of a society that no longer teaches people how to ask deeper questions. In a world that encourages you to ask, "How can I be successful?" Frankl suggests we ask instead, "What does the world need from me?" Or, "What task is life asking me to fulfill?" This shift, from consumption to contribution, from pleasure to purpose, has profound psychological effects. People who live with a sense of meaning show greater resilience, lower levels of anxiety, stronger relationships, and even longer life expectancy. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that having a purpose in life activates the brain, US reward circuits, and reduces the activation of stress-related regions. Purpose literally changes the chemistry of your brain. But this is not new wisdom. Carl Jung, working around the same time as Frankl, believed that the human psyche is structured around archetypes, timeless patterns that shape our inner world. One of the most important, he said, is the archetype of the self, the deeper integrated version of who we truly are. The journey toward the self, according to Jung, is not about ego gratification, but about meaning, wholeness, a sense of harmony between the inner and outer worlds. The Sufi mystics spoke of something similar. They said each soul has a unique nafs, a divine fingerprint. Your task is not to become someone else, but to peel back the layers of ego, illusion, and fear to uncover your essence. Meaning, in this view, is not added to life. It is revealed through self-awareness, service, and spiritual alignment. Even in the mythic stories we grow up with, this theme echoes. The hero's journey, described by Joseph Campbell, always begins with an ordinary life disrupted by a call. Something greater beckons. The hero resists, then accepts the challenge, ventures into the unknown, suffers, transforms, and returns, forever changed, with a gift to offer the world. Meaning is not found in staying safe. It is born in the fire of transformation. In all of these perspectives, modern, psychological, ancient, spiritual, mythological, one truth emerges. Meaning is not handed to you. It is earned. Not through achievement, but through presence. Not through escape, but through engagement. So why is this so difficult today? Because modern life has made meaning harder to see. We live in a society that idolizes productivity but often ignores purpose. We're told to optimize our mornings, our finances, our performance, but rarely our values. The algorithms we live in reward clickability, not depth. We are constantly distracted, always busy, and yet deeply underfed in the soul. This creates what existential psychologists call ontological insecurity, a state of being where we no longer feel grounded in who we are or why we are here. It shows up in the epidemic of burnout, in the rise of anxiety disorders, in the quiet panic many feel when they realize they don't know what they truly want, only what they've been told to want. But there is hope in this crisis. Because meaning is not about having the right answers. It's about asking the right questions, and that's something we can learn, practice, and return to, again and again. One of the most powerful concepts Frankl offered is this: meaning can be discovered in 3 ways. First, through creative work, doing something that brings value to the world. This could be art, invention, caregiving, leadership, teaching, any act of creation that transcends the self. Second, through experiential values, the experience of love, beauty, nature, or connection. A moment with a child, a sunset that stills the mind, music that breaks your heart open. And third, through attitudinal values, the way we choose to respond to suffering. Frankl believed that even when we can no longer change our circumstances, we are still free to choose our response. That response, he said, is the final human freedom. This third pathway is perhaps the most radical, because it tells us that even pain, even loss, even death can be meaningful, not because they are good, but because they invite us to respond with courage, with dignity, and with love. And this, in the end, is what ties together all psychological and spiritual traditions. The idea that meaning is not a luxury, but a responsibility. Not something we passively receive, but something we co-create with life itself. You do not need to have your entire life figured out to start this journey. You only need to listen, to pay attention, to ask, what is life asking of you right now? Where do you feel most alive? What small act, what quiet offering would make today feel worthwhile? Not just for you, but for someone else. These are not easy questions, but they are real, and they are yours. Frankl wrote that life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose, and that in every moment, no matter how difficult, there is a space between stimulus and response, where you can choose who you are going to be. That space, he said, is your freedom, and it is also your power. What happens when we live without meaning? Not just in theory, but in the silence between our daily routines, in the decisions we postpone, in the way we wake up and feel nothing. The truth is, the absence of meaning does not show up all at once. It leaks slowly into our lives, and if we do not notice it early, it becomes the quiet architect of discontent. Psychologists have long studied the impact of this disconnection. One of the most well-documented consequences is existential depression, a form of despair that arises not from chemical imbalance, but from a deep sense of purposelessness. This is not the kind of sadness that comes from loss. It is the sadness of never having something to lose in the first place, a feeling that life itself is hollow. You might see it in someone who has everything society promised, career, income, status, and yet finds no joy in it. You might see it in the young adult staring at endless career options but feeling paralyzed, because none of them feel meaningful. You might even see it in your own reflection, during those quiet hours when no one is watching and nothing distracts you from the question, what is the point of all this? When people lack purpose, they often turn to substitutes. These may work temporarily, but they eventually demand a price. Some dive into perfectionism, hoping that achievement will create meaning. Others numb themselves with consumption, social media, alcohol, shopping, constant stimulation. Still others fall into cynicism, pretending not to care, because caring hurts more when it leads nowhere. In social terms, this disconnection from meaning leads to a crisis of identity. Without a compass, people become easy prey to external narratives, advertising, ideology, peer pressure, Instead of asking, "What do I value?" we start asking, "What do others expect?" This is how we slowly hand over our agency. Frankl saw this clearly in the aftermath of war. He noticed that many returning soldiers, though physically free, were psychologically lost. They had been given a mission during the war: survive, protect, fight. But once that mission disappeared, so did their structure of meaning. Some fell into despair, others into addiction, and some simply drifted through life, haunted not by what they had seen, but by what they no longer believed in. The same thing happens today, but in quieter ways. Think of retirement. Many people look forward to the day they no longer have to work. But if work has been their only source of purpose, retirement can feel like death in slow motion. Or consider grief. When someone you love dies, especially if they were the center of your meaning, the world can feel flat, colorless. No therapy technique can remove that grief. But reconnecting with meaning, even through the pain, can slowly begin to restore a sense of life. We see it in relationships, too. Couples who do not share a deeper purpose often drift apart once the initial attraction fades. Without a shared why, even love can feel aimless. Families become transactional. Friendships become hollow. Connection withers. And in the broader social landscape, the consequences are even more striking. Look at political polarization. Beneath the noise and division is a deeper hunger. People want to feel that their lives matter, that they are part of something larger. When they cannot find that meaning through connection or service, they may seek it through anger, through identity battles, through allegiance to causes that give them structure, even if those causes divide rather than unite. Or look at how young people are taught to define success. In many cultures, it's about productivity, test scores, accolades. But when you define success without grounding it in meaning, you raise generations who can perform brilliantly but feel deeply empty. Who ask, "What now?" after every milestone. Even our relationship to time changes when we lose meaning. Without a purpose, time feels either rushed or stagnant. Days blur into weeks. Moments lose their weight. Life becomes either a sprint with no finish line or a drift with no direction. In either case, it becomes deeply unsatisfying. Frankl believed that this emptiness was one of the most urgent psychological crises of modern life. And it's hard to argue otherwise, because when meaning erodes, everything else becomes fragile. Identity, for instance, is no longer rooted in inner values, but in external signals. Who we appear to be replaces who we truly are. This makes people more anxious, more reactive, more prone to comparison. It is not enough to be. You must be seen, validated, echoed. Confidence also suffers. When we do not know what we stand for, we become easily swayed. Decisions become harder. Boundaries become weaker. Self-worth becomes tied to temporary metrics. Confidence, in its deepest form, comes not from competence alone, but from conviction, from knowing what matters to you and living from that place. Even career choices, once driven by creativity or service, often get reduced to survival or status. People end up in roles they never chose consciously. They wake up years later wondering whose life they are living, and by then the fear of change has grown stronger than the hunger for meaning. But the pain of this disconnection is not only personal, it echoes through history. Consider ancient myths, the ones that still move us after centuries. These stories often begin with a character who has lost their way, a king who forgets justice, a warrior who forgets compassion, a seeker who forgets their purpose. The hero's journey is always a return to meaning, not just external victory, but inner alignment. In Greek mythology, the story of Odysseus is not simply about returning home, it is about rediscovering identity, purpose, and love after years of distraction and loss. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is paralyzed on the battlefield. not by fear of death, but by loss of meaning. He cannot fight until he remembers why he must act, what his duty is. In each of these stories, the turning point is not external success, but internal clarity. The moment the character stops asking, "What do I want?" and begins asking, "What does life ask of me?" This is where Frankl's voice becomes not just philosophical, but prophetic. Because in every age people suffer not only from hardship, but from the absence of meaning within that hardship. Pain without purpose becomes unbearable. But pain with purpose becomes bearable, and even transformative. The good news is that meaning can return, even in the aftermath of collapse, even in the midst of uncertainty. But it cannot be bought, forced, or downloaded. It has to be lived into, moment by moment, day by day, and it begins with honesty, a quiet reckoning, a willingness to ask the uncomfortable questions. Am I living in alignment with my values? Have I lost myself in chasing approval? What would I be doing if I were not afraid? Meaning does not shout. It whispers. It lives in the margins, in the way you speak to someone when they are in pain, in the courage to say no when it would be easier to say yes, in the pause before reacting, in the choice to love when love is hard. These are not heroic acts, but they are meaningful ones. And in a world that often forgets what matters most, choosing meaning, again and again, is one of the bravest things you can do. So, what do we do? How do we find something to live and die for in a world that constantly pulls us in 1,000 directions? Viktor Frankl never promised an easy answer. Meaning, he said, is not something you invent out of thin air. It's something you discover, like a hidden path in a forest. And while each person's meaning is different, the tools to find it often follow shared patterns. Let's begin with the most important shift. Stop asking, "What do I want from life?" and start asking, "What does life want from me?" This question turns everything around. It takes you out of the consumer mindset and into the sacred space of contribution. It moves you from passive receiver to active participant. Meaning, Frankl believed, is found in 3 primary ways: through work or creation, through love or deep connection, and through the courage to endure suffering with dignity. Each of these paths offers a different kind of medicine. Let's start with work, not in the capitalist sense, but in the spiritual sense. This could be a craft, a mission, a role you play that feels authentic. It doesn't have to be your job. Some people find meaning in raising a child, teaching others, restoring an old garden, or protecting their community. The key is not status or efficiency. The key is service. Is what you're doing offering something of value to the world, however small, however quiet? Ask yourself, what am I naturally drawn to? When do I feel most alive? If no one were watching, what would I still do? These questions are not about grand destiny. They are about realignment. Next comes love. Not romantic fantasies, but real connection. To love someone, Frankl said, is to see them as they truly are, to recognize their uniqueness and help them grow into it. But love also includes how you relate to the world. Do you feel connected to others, to the earth, to something greater than yourself? One of the most healing practices here is presence. Put down the distractions. Listen fully. Look people in the eyes. Share your inner world with someone you trust. Create space for others to do the same. Meaning grows in that space between souls. And finally, there is the most misunderstood path: suffering. Frankl never glorified pain. He knew its brutality, but he also knew that pain, when faced with courage and dignity, can lead to transformation. He wrote that even in Auschwitz, where everything was stripped away, people who held on to a deeper purpose, memories of a loved one, a desire to write, a spiritual ideal, were more likely to survive, not just physically, but spiritually. That's why the third path to meaning is not about avoiding pain, but about integrating it. Ask, Can I find growth in this loss? Is there a lesson I'm meant to carry forward? Who might be helped by my survival, my testimony, my resilience? This is where modern psychology and ancient wisdom begin to meet. From a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, we know that meaning often comes from reframing, not denying the pain, but choosing how we interpret it. From a Jungian view, suffering is part of individuation, the long process of becoming who you truly are. The shadow, the wound, the grief, they are not obstacles, they are initiations. And from Sufi philosophy, suffering can be the fire that burns away illusion. What remains is not weakness, but essence. What's left is the real. So, what does this mean in practical terms? It means creating daily space to ask deeper questions, to slow down enough to feel your soul's response. Here are a few practices that can help. 1. Journaling for meaning. Each morning or evening, ask, what gave me energy today? When did I feel disconnected or empty? What would I do if I had no fear? This helps you notice patterns, not just of behavior, but of value. You begin to see what you are moving toward and what you are unconsciously resisting. 2. Vision-based goal setting. Instead of setting goals based on productivity, try this. Choose one long-term vision that excites you, not others' expectations. Break it down into values-based actions. For example, if your vision is to live with compassion, ask, what does compassion look like today? Maybe it's forgiving someone. Maybe it's helping a neighbor. Maybe it's being kinder to yourself. 3. Meditative presence. Sit in silence, not to escape life but to enter it more fully. Focus on the breath, on your heartbeat, on the sounds around you. As you quiet the mind, the deeper voice emerges, the one that remembers what matters. 4. Create a purpose board. Instead of a vision board filled with yachts and houses, try this. Write down 3 people who inspire you. Write down 3 causes that break your heart. Write down 3 moments you felt alive. Look for overlap. That overlap is often where your path begins. 5. Talk to your future self. Write a letter from your 80-year-old self. What do they regret? What do they celebrate? What advice would they give you today? This isn't fantasy. It's wisdom. Because part of you already knows. You just need to make space for it to speak. And if meaning still feels distant, that's okay. It unfolds slowly. It often begins as a whisper before it becomes a flame. Even the act of searching is meaningful. Frankl warned against the obsession with happiness. He believed happiness was a byproduct, not a goal. Like falling asleep, the more you chase it, the more it escapes. But meaning, that's something you can choose. Every moment is a chance to live more meaningfully. To respond instead of react. To build instead of numb. To love, to serve, to endure. Even small acts carry weight. Writing a letter you've delayed. Telling someone you admire them. Standing up for someone who can't. Planting something you may never see grow. These are the quiet threads that stitch a meaningful life, and when you live this way, something profound happens. The world begins to speak back. Synchronicities appear. Connections deepen. You begin to trust yourself again, not because you have all the answers, but because you are living the right questions. Frankl's message is not one of grandiosity. He does not say your purpose must be heroic. He simply says it must be yours. Authentically, deeply, courageously yours. And you do not have to figure it all out at once. You just have to begin. Choose a value. Live by it. Choose a moment. Be present in it. Choose a person. Love them well. In these tiny choices, purpose reveals itself. You are not here to float through life numb. You are not here just to perform. You are here to matter, to make meaning, to become. And if you ever forget that, listen for the whisper. It's easy to believe that life is just happening to us, that we're passengers on some runaway train of expectation, performance, and noise. But Viktor Frankl offered a radically different truth, that even in the most horrific circumstances, we still have a choice. A choice in how we see, how we respond, and, ultimately, how we live. He said that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our power, the power to shape who we become. If we've learned anything from Frankl's journey, from the freezing nights in Auschwitz, from the silent deaths of friends, from the unbearable weight of loss, it's that meaning is not found in ideal conditions. It is not something waiting at the end of comfort or certainty. It is something we carve out of reality with awareness, with courage, and with love. And when we begin to live that way, asking not what life can give us but what life is asking of us, something within us shifts. We stop running, we stop performing, and we begin to remember who we are. Frankl once wrote that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. That is not just a poetic line, it is a map for navigating life when it breaks, when dreams shatter, when love is lost, when the world no longer makes sense. The why does not erase the pain, but it gives it a container, a reason, a horizon to keep walking toward. But the modern world often distracts us from this pursuit. We're taught to chase happiness like it's a possession. We measure ourselves by external standards, followers, income, approval, status, hoping that one day it will all click into place. But it rarely does, because what we really crave is not more, but meaning. We crave the feeling that our lives matter, that we are living from the core, not the mask, that something inside us is aligned with something beyond us. And the truth is that something does exist. You've felt it before, maybe in the stillness of a sunset, maybe in the eyes of someone you love, maybe when you created something beautiful, or helped someone without needing recognition. That quiet certainty, that you are in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens enough to guide us forward. Meaning is not a destination. It's a way of being, a practice, a relationship with life itself. It asks for presence, it asks for courage, it asks for love, and maybe most of all, it asks for honesty. The willingness to look at your own life and ask, what have I abandoned that I once loved? What part of me have I silenced to belong? What would I risk everything for if I truly lived? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones worth asking. Because when we live with meaning, we do more than just survive. We participate in something sacred. We show up differently in our relationships. We hold space for others with more grace. We become more grounded, more resilient, more alive. And slowly the fog begins to clear. You begin to walk, not always with certainty, but with clarity. You don't need to know the entire path, you just need to keep taking the next step in alignment with your values. You may never become rich, famous, or widely understood, but you will become whole. And that wholeness, that quiet integrity, is worth everything. Viktor Frankl survived a world that tried to erase meaning, and in doing so, he became one of its greatest defenders. He didn't just teach us how to find purpose, he showed us that purpose can survive anything, even despair. So maybe the real question is not, what do I want to do with my life, but rather, what is life asking of me right now? And if you don't know the answer yet, that's okay. Sit with it, walk with it, write to it, breathe into it, because meaning is not something out there. It is seated within you, and the more you listen, the more it begins to bloom. Even now, in this very moment, you are already on the path. Maybe you've watched this far because something inside you is stirring. A quiet ache, a subtle knowing that life is passing, that time is not waiting, that despite all you've built, all you've learned, all you've endured, something still feels incomplete. That ache is not your enemy. It is your compass. In the still moments, When the world quiets, when the noise dies down, you may feel a strange hollowness, like a space waiting to be filled. You might mistake it for loneliness, for failure, for disconnection. But often that space is sacred. It's the room your meaning needs to grow. Frankl understood that modern suffering is not just physical or material. It's existential. We live in a time where people are drowning in comfort yet starving for purpose, surrounded by stimulation but yearning for stillness, achieving milestones and yet whispering to themselves in the dark, "Is this all there is?" Meaning is not something you can hack or hustle. It is not found in convenience or control. It is born in relationship, with yourself, with others, with the mystery of life itself. There is a word in Japanese, ikigai, roughly translated as a reason to wake up in the morning. Not a job, not a goal, a reason, that quiet engine behind the eyes, that flicker in the heart that says, "This matters. I matter." Frankl's life was a living confrontation with what it means to live in a world of loss. He lost his parents. He lost his wife. He lost his home. And yet he found something stronger than despair. He found that the human spirit, when anchored in meaning, does not break. It bends, it cries, it rages, but it does not disappear. So what does that mean for us? It means that you don't need perfect circumstances to live with meaning. You don't need the approval of others, or endless certainty, or a 5-year plan. What you need is honesty, curiosity, the willingness to sit with discomfort long enough to hear what your soul is trying to say. We often look for clarity in external signs: a career breakthrough, a romantic partner, a spiritual awakening. But sometimes meaning begins in much smaller places, in the decision to stay sober for one more day, in the choice to forgive when anger would be easier, in the act of creating something no one may ever see. The world will tell you that success is the highest aim, but Frankl, and many before him, remind us that meaning is higher still, because success without meaning is hollow, but meaning without success can still be full. You may not be remembered for your accolades, but you will be remembered for your presence, your integrity, the way you made others feel seen. And that brings us to one of the deepest truths of all. Meaning is not found in isolation. It is found in connection, not just with others, but with life itself. There is a myth in Western culture that meaning is individual, that you must carve your unique path in solitude. And yes, part of that is true, but the full picture is richer. Meaning arises in community, in service, in shared laughter, shared pain, shared dreams. Frankl observed that those who survived the camps with their humanity intact were often the ones who could still love, who gave their last piece of bread to another, who told stories to keep others warm through memory. Even when everything was taken, they chose to give. And that choice is still ours. Every day we choose what kind of human we want to be. We can choose to numb, or we can choose to feel. We can choose to chase, or we can choose to listen. We can choose to perform, or we can choose to live. One of the quietest revolutions in the modern world is this: learning to live from the inside out, to orient your days not around trends or expectations but around meaning, real, embodied, difficult, beautiful meaning. So ask yourself gently, what is calling me right now? What needs my attention, not for validation, but for care? If this year were my last, how would I spend the next hour? Let your answers surprise you. Let them soften you. You may find that the work you've been chasing isn't your real work. You may discover that the person you've become is not the person you promised your younger self you'd be. And that's okay. There is still time. Not to redo, but to return. Return to what matters. Return to what anchors you. Return to the life waiting quietly beneath the noise. Meaning isn't a thunderbolt. It's often more like a thread. Thin, almost invisible at times, But if you follow it long enough with patience and trust, it begins to weave something beautiful. A life. A life you can look back on and say, yes, that was mine. I showed up. I listened. I loved. I tried. And in the end, that's all we can do. Viktor Frankl didn't give the world easy hope. He gave it honest hope. Hope that says, you will suffer, but you will not be alone. You will fall, but you can rise. You will feel lost, but you are never beyond redemption. So hold your questions gently. Walk your path slowly. Live as if your life means something, because it does. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. If something in you stirred during this video, a memory, a longing, a quiet voice you haven't heard in years, hold on to that. It means you're alive to the questions that matter. It means you're not numb. It means you're ready to live more deeply, more honestly, more purposefully. This space, this channel, is for people like you, people who are tired of surface-level answers, people who want to explore life through the lens of psychology, philosophy, history, and the inner world. People who feel that growth isn't about chasing perfection, but about remembering who you are. Every video here is a kind of mirror. Sometimes it reflects your wounds. Sometimes it reflects your strength. But always it invites you back to yourself, with tenderness, with depth, with dignity. So, if you want to keep walking this path with us, if you want more content that blends ancient wisdom with modern tools, personal healing with cultural insight, storytelling with soul, subscribe. Not for more noise, but for more meaning. Because we live in a time when reclaiming your power doesn't mean overpowering others. It means knowing who you are, where you stand, and what you stand for. It means mastering your emotions, setting honest boundaries, creating with integrity, and showing up with presence. And you don't have to do it alone. We're building something rare here, a space for emotional intelligence, thoughtful reflection, and conversations that don't rush to fix you, but instead walk beside you. So if you're ready to explore the kind of life worth living and dying for, click subscribe. Not as a commitment to us, but as a quiet promise to yourself. You have a voice. You have a story. And even if the world hasn't always seen it, it matters. Let's keep asking the hard questions. Let's keep telling the real stories. Let's keep choosing depth over distraction. Because in a world that is always pulling us outward, the real revolution is turning inward and living from there. We're just getting started, and you're exactly where you need to be.